Hello and welcome to 100% Real with Ruby. Today I have Clara on, and she is, let's just say that when I came across her page, I found out that she had podcasts, and I binge listened to every single one that she was on because she was speaking my language. Like, there is a difference between just a general psychologist, therapist, and someone who also practices the whole sports, who has been in the same position as me. She's competed in figure comps. She's chased strength. And I just related to so much of the way that she spoke of things because she's been through the mental toughness of getting really lean for figure, of pushing her limits in strength. And I'm just so excited to have her on. So I'm going to let her kind of introduce herself intertwined with the ultimate physique. It is a goal of many, and it's kind of like perfection in that it's an illusion that is based on your perception, your past biases, your past experiences of what actual perfection in your eyes is, which is completely different from what I see as my goal and my perfect. So it doesn't technically exist, and that's kind of the same as the ultimate physique. And it's also the same as body image, because what you perceive as the ultimate body image is completely different from the other person. But the quote that always stuck with me is, you don't see yourself as you think you are, or not even as others think you are, but who you think others think you are. Mm-hmm. So in all of that, what is the ultimate physique? What is this whole getting leaner, losing weight, perfect body thing? Does it exist, or is it something else?
So many questions to answer all in one go. But firstly, though, thank you so much for having me. It's super exciting. I've never had someone like go and listen to every podcast that I've recorded. Even I've not listened to every podcast that I've recorded. So I totally appreciate that. And wow, what a big question to start with. I think before kind of getting into it, explaining my positionality might be helpful just to give a bit of context with regards to where my answers are coming from. So in terms of my background, I am a sport and exercise psychologist in training, and I have been studying psychology for the last 10 years, and I've been working in the fitness industry as a fitness coach or in some capacity for the last 5.5. And at the moment, I blend both my role as an exercise psychologist and as a fitness coach. And yes, as you said, I've competed in bodybuilding, in bikini specifically, but also before that, I'd been a dancer my entire life. So I think I've always been in and around sports or performance contexts that have had a lot of emphasis placed on the subjective nature of beauty, or a lot of attention placed on how one looks. And I think that as well as, of course, the society that we live in, being a cisgendered female, that has made an impact and a difference, and has, of course, affected how I perceive my body. Obviously, the ultimate physique doesn't exist. We know that. But the way that we construct, I think, our desired physique is just informed by so many of those experiences. There's not just this one thing that makes us strive towards a particular body or strive towards building a particular body. It often is a combination of events in our lives, things that we've learned, and as well as, in part our biology and how our body naturally presents to the world, and our perception of that then leads us to have certain ideals about how we should look. So what I mean by that, kind of in plain English, is that someone who's stereotypically always been quite lean, who's had those socially desirable traits without much effort at all, is not as likely to have experienced the same amount of body image pressures as someone who biologically and through lifestyle maybe hasn't had those same attributes. And so their experience of what that ideal body is going to be completely different. And how they perhaps go about pursuing it is also going to be determined by their previous life experiences. And once they perhaps achieve it or get as close as they can to it, their relationship to that body is also going to be really different. I mean, I don't know if you've seen this in the clients that you work with, but perhaps, or even amongst competitors in the bodybuilding world, someone who's fallen into bodybuilding from a weight loss journey, from a major weight loss journey, their relationship to bodybuilding and their relationship to their body is often very different to that of someone who's always been quite athletic looking, quite lean, and just kind of went, oh, bodybuilding kind of seems like a next natural step for me to fall into. And then they develop the same, the particular physique. They might step on stage looking very, very comparable, but because their journeys to that place and because their life history with their relationship with their body has been so different, like personally, but also kind of in society, the way that they then feel about achieving that perfect body is really different. And that, of course, then determines like how comfortable they feel letting go of it, reverse dieting, gaining weight again, all these other factors kind of have that cascading effect. So don't really know if that answers the question because it's such a big question, but I think that there's not a single factor one single factor that determines what that perfect body looks like for an individual. How they go about pursuing it and how attaining it or coming close to it then impacts on their life.
You brought up a very important topic that isn't even to do with competing in itself, but when people lose a whole bunch of weight and they get to their smallest body, their then fear of gaining it back again, of going back to the thing they hated, and all of those fears that they had in the past that they didn't allow themselves to go through because of maybe their approach they took, or not being aware of what nutritional periodization is, or the way that what maintenance even is, what happens after the fact. That fear then has them so focused on their body in such a negative way that it can lead to a deterioration of body image, or just stop them from progressing forwards. But then how would you approach that person that has lost all the weight before, or that has lost the weight, gained some back, and is now in this moot point where, because they're so fixated on it, that's leading to all the self-sabotage that stop them moving either direction?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm kind of writing down notes so I don't forget to mention these things. I think kind of what you mentioned there, right? Like there's always almost what I call like a Goldilocks effect, like the kind of the sweet spot of where we can be in relation to our bodies. Because if someone has been kind of like, say, clinically obese, for the lack of a better term, and has lost weight, then there is going to be a major benefit to their health, objectively speaking, in terms of, yeah, well, they probably feel a lot better. They probably are going to be a lot healthier. But it's when that relationship to that weight loss becomes really rigid that problems arise, exactly as you mentioned. So if someone, as an exercise psychologist, if someone is presenting with a very rigid relationship to their body image, to their body weight, kind of like displaying behaviors that suggest that they don't want to let go, which then of course leads to self-sabotage, because rigidity is incredibly unhelpful, then of course you tackle that rigidity by developing psychological flexibility, what I call kind of psychological flexibility, and that accompanying that with helping them develop self-compassion, I think is, at least in my experience, in my clinical experience, the best way to help someone kind of move through some of those sticking points, because they are really, really damaging, and they are also very normal and not somebody's fault for ending up kind of like in that headspace. It's in many ways unavoidable, or certainly like with the level of psychoeducation that we have about these things, no one really realizes that there's a massive risk to focusing on your body and on food. We kind of understand it, but until we experience it, it's like, oh shit, this is what people were talking about. Fuck. So if someone is kind of engaging in self-sabotage constantly because they are so fused with this idea of like, I must maintain this body weight, I must not gain weight again, then tackling that with compassion and with psychological flexibility is probably the best way to go about it. And that's like an intervention in and of itself, but that's kind of where I would start.
I have two things I want to bring up later, but I think maybe bringing in one of my past experiences, and you acting as though it is me now, but it was me in the past, and then you and how you would deal with old me could help people listening to this. Yeah. So when I first started, because I was really underweight, like I had disordered eating, I had my focus of gaining weight on the scale, and I got excited seeing my biceps grow. I got excited flexing them. Like I had what I would call a positive relationship with my body, with exercise, because I knew that what I was doing was leading to progress in terms of muscle gain. in terms of I'm actually learning to fuel myself now.
Mhm.
I prioritized my peri-workout nutrition straight away, and I knew that I needed protein. So I was in a positive direction moving that distance. I don't know whether back then I still had any body image concerns, but I do remember confidence was always a thing. But I do remember that I then got into figure competing because the manager of the gym got me into it. And it was in the pursuit of then having the 6 meals a day, being told I needed to do faster cardio, being told that I needed to shred this fat, and the fixation on getting myself to that lean state for stage then triggered me to, okay, I'm so used to seeing the scale go down now. I was scared to get it above a certain number.
Yeah.
I was I had clothes for that smallest body again. And I hated how I felt when I started fitting tightly into my bigger clothes, even though I knew, hey, I was at this place before. I actually looked really good before. And looking back on old photos, I looked amazing before. But I felt, hey, I was feeling fat at that skinny, that lean and look, that anything else other than that was just, no, this is wrong for me. And I feel like if we even relate that to losing the weight before and then getting so adjusted to that, even though it's kind of different, but it's like your pursuit of losing weight and getting so fixated on the numbers going down, anything other than that starts triggering emotional responses. I need to diet again. I need to cut my build short because we know we want to build our bodies. People listening to this want to build their bodies. They know that they should know that they can't diet forever, but they've just chased a lower scale number. They've had this dieter's identity for so long that anything other than that is a trigger. So how would you approach me or anyone in that situation like that?
Yeah, how would I approach it? I think that firstly, I'd be working a little bit on psych education. So I think normalizing that experience is the most important thing, because often, exactly kind of as you said, right, we know that we need to gain weight, we know that we need to kind of restore our health, etc., but we find it so difficult. And then what can often happen, it doesn't kind of stop there, what can often happen is that people will start to feel like they'll start to criticize themselves for finding it hard. So not only do they feel bad because it's hard to gain weight, but then they feel bad about feeling bad. And they're like, I should know better. Why am I getting so tangled up? I know that body weight doesn't matter, but why do I feel so shit? And then they feel 10 times worse, right? So the place that I would start in would be with some psych education around normalizing the fact that finding this really difficult, even though it's super important, even though when you're at your leanest, you feel fucking dreadful. No one feels great when they're stage lean. Nobody, right? So normalizing the fact that finding it difficult is completely normal, that it's not, you're not choosing it. It just is difficult. I would start there. I'd also do some psych education around the actual evidence base that we have available to us that demonstrates incredibly clearly that pursuing body image related goals, pursuing goals that require an increased focus of our attention on what we eat and or on how much we exercise, that those things directly have an impact on our body image and on how we feel about ourselves. So even just being able to help someone understand that is factual, that can make a really big difference, because then they go, all right, okay, so it's not just me. I'm not just being a weirdo here, finding this really difficult. That can often reduce the shame from, feeling bad about feeling bad. And it then helps that person commence the journey towards gaining weight and kind of moving away from that rigidity with a little bit more compassion, understanding that it's going to be hard and that it's going to be unpleasant. I think that's the most important thing. If we are, especially because of course, in society, especially for women, there's so much pressure on our appearance, as there is for men, but it's particularly for women. We've been conditioned for so long that thinner is better. And even though we know from our experience that actually we look better, like yourself, when you gained some weight, the conditioning that we've been exposed to, we can't delete that knowledge. We can't just go into our brains and get rid of it. So it's almost like understanding and accepting that challenge is going to be a part of it, but that we get to choose how we relate to that challenge, right? So it's almost like you're not going to get rid of that negative voice. I personally don't take the approach that is possible. I think that attempting to get rid of this negative voice is a futile pursuit, because it's always going to be there, right? You didn't choose for it to be there, so it's always going to be there. However, we can choose how we relate to that particular negative voice. Do we, take its advice, or do we just like choose to focus on the things that are going to be helpful? So with someone who was presenting just like you, super rigid around like their body weight, like not wanting to go above a certain number, I'd maybe think about, how is this rigidity getting in the way of you doing other things that are important to you? Like, is it stopping you quite likely from socializing around food? Is it, making those social experiences incredibly anxiety provoking? And how is that then impacting on your health? So take a view of, what is this getting in the way of? Like, how much is this actually costing you? All this focus on like trying to maintain a lower body weight. And once we find something that is, that the person just doesn't want to be continue to spend money on, so to speak, like something that is too costly, that they go, hang on a second, this doesn't make any sense. Like, I really value, for someone, like relationships and friendships might be everything to them, and yet this rigidity is costing them time with their friends, time with their family. It's meaning that either they're not partaking, or when they do, they feel really anxious, and then they're withdrawn, and then they feel bad, and then they leave. And then they feel worse because they were in a bad mood when socializing with their friends, because they were too fit. Do you see what I mean? So like I would try to identify like what the cost is, and then start to think about, okay, well, how can we work on accepting that some of these, challenging thoughts and feelings are going to be there? How can we address them with compassion? And how can we kind of like, push them away a little bit, not get rid of them, but simply just like gently push them away so that they're not so up in our face, and that there's a little bit of distance between us and that negative thing that's showing up, enough distance for you to be able to go, okay, do I go in this direction, or actually is there another option for me? Like, is there another way for me to move forward with this? So probably start there.
Yeah, and this isn't just relating to people that have competed in the past. Most people, if not all people listening to this, haven't been in that position where they were stage lean. So they probably feel really good about the fact that they just lost all of this excess body fat at one point. But then there are, I guess, a lot of people who would be listening to this who have done a diet phase before, who are now like skinny fat and are still in that same position as exemplar A. But then exemplar B could be the person that has been chronically dieting their whole life, trying to diet in quotation marks, but not actually seeing results. Mm-hmm. And regardless of the fact that they may still have weight to lose, the focus on it is not serving them right now. So that needing to take the focus away from the dieting mentality of chasing lean, of chasing fat loss, would serve both of those people in different contexts.
Yeah.
But then the skinny person would still have the same issues with trying to fit into their skinny jeans and feeling like their clothes are really tight, but knowing that on the other side there is, what's the cost? Like you said, what's the cost of you holding on to this lean, onto those skinny pants? The cost is, because I know something that I kept having a conversation with myself over and over, and I still do it now because I'm in a building phase. My conversation with myself is, I'm putting in all of this effort into my training. I'm struggling through my sets. I'm putting in all of this grind, grit. I'm showing up. Do I really want to be putting in all of this effort and wasting my time, my strain, my mental stress, all that stuff for no results? Or do I want to actually eat the way that I should be eating to then see the muscle results that I want to get out of it, so that my grind is worth the harvest? So both of those exemplars, how would you then approach the skinny fat, which is kind of the same way that you said, and then the person that does need to let go of it, even though they haven't, quote unquote, they feel they haven't earned it yet because they still have a lot of weight to lose?
I think like in a quite a similar way. So one of the first things I always do with clients when we start working together is establish what their values are, like what matters to you, kind of what I was saying earlier, like so that we can then see what it's getting in, like what this rigid mindset is getting in the way of. So in the same way that for someone who has lost weight and is struggling to gain it back, and someone who has been constantly in this cycle of dieting and kind of isn't willing to let go of that, even though they're not seeing results, again, thinking about what matters to them will help them see if their actions are bringing them closer to those things or not, or if their actions are getting in the way of it. So what I mean by that, for example, too, is even for someone who's wanting to lose weight, right? If they've been constantly trying to diet but not seeing any results, and they're not actually losing weight. Like, they're just kind of like in this mind frame. So probably what's going to help them is to try and lose some weight, to actually see some results. But what I would argue is that perhaps the thing motivating them, or the thing motivating the weight loss behavior up until this point, has just been meaningless to them. Like, it's just kind of not meant enough. And I say that really loosely. What I mean by that more so is that they've not linked it to something that is kind of like more intrinsically driven. So the way that I kind of explain values is a little bit like a compass. So on a compass, if you choose to go east, it doesn't matter, you will have heard this before, but it doesn't matter how much time you spend walking east, you never get to east, right? You simply move in that direction. And in moving in that direction, you will arrive at different destinations that might be places that you wanted to visit. But your intention was always to move east and to continue to move east. So if we think about this in the fitness context, if someone identifies values that are relevant to them, for example, relationships, let's just take the example of someone who has been constantly dieting, and they've always been single because their weight has always gotten in the way of their confidence, and they've not chosen to put themselves out there. And so therefore their weight is almost like getting in the way, right, of them being able to, I don't know, go out there and find a relationship. The thing that matters most to that person isn't weight loss, it's relationships, right? And so if we think about how will working on nurturing those relationships improve your life, and how can a focus on weight loss support you in making those steps towards relationships. So you're not thinking just about weight loss, you're thinking about relationships are really important to me. And if relationships are really important to me, and if having better relationships is gonna, improve my life quality, then that's the direction you're moving in. What places do I need to visit in going there? What tools do I need? And maybe weight loss is something that facilitates the pursuit of those other values that are more important. Because weight loss in itself, I mean, it's a little bit, unless, say, like, if health is a value of yours, and that's amazing, but then it's not just about weight loss, it's about so many other things, right? So even that helps us expand and move away from just focusing on scales. Because again, if health is a value of yours, then weight loss on a scale might just be one of the metrics that you're thinking about, because actually sleep contributes to health, our stress management contributes to health, our nutritional composition contributes to our health. It's not just about the number on the scale, there's all these other behaviors that also accompany it. And so that's why thinking about values, irrespective of kind of like the problem that the client is presenting with, is a really helpful way to kind of then think, okay, well, behaviorally then what should you be doing? Like, what do you need to do? If this fixation with scales and an unwillingness to let go of the scale number, or to gain weight, etc., practice those behaviors, if that's getting in the way of you accomplishing or doing more things that are important to you in this area of your life, then what do you need to change? And often people can then start to see how being so rigid is getting in the way. And no one likes to feel like they're not able to pursue the things that matter to them, because actually that brings a lot of fulfillment, meaning to our life, to be able to see ourselves do these things. And so when you can link it to that, and of course then provide that client with the strategies to be able to take those behaviors on board and engage in that behavior change, that's when I guess you can help them move away from just zoning in on that scale number.
Yeah, and
yeah.
Yeah, this is actually one big reason why I don't allow my girls to use the scale, because so many of them have come in to coaching and they pursue anything without actually knowing how their body feels or knowing how to tune into their body, because they've let numbers dictate their whole life. And now with the increasing technology with everything, they're trying to let like smartwatches and whatever other devices tell them how they slept and how they should be acting the next day, because it says a certain number. It's like you're not even allowing yourself to tune into how you feel. And I guess also with that pursuit, it's like weight loss is never the actual goal. It's just like a chapter in the book. It's maybe a vehicle on the way to whatever your goal is. And if weight loss is the only goal, what's going to happen after that? You don't know any other goals. And it's kind of like, how people prepare for weddings, and all of these months are going into wedding planning, this, that, and the other. It's almost like you don't have a life outside of weddings. Then the wedding comes, the wedding goes, and you're lost, kind of like post-comp blues. That's how people approach their weight loss journey. And it's no wonder they go back to their old habits, because they didn't bring life with them. They just become this empty shell. There's no substance there. And on another note, the whole self-compassion thing, people are really scared of allowing themselves a little leeway, because what if they become lazy? What if they let themselves go? What if all these what ifs, without realizing, I always say that compassion is the yin to the yang of discipline. Like, they need to coexist, because you're not really being compassionate with yourself if you're neglecting yourself and letting yourself rot away by not showing up for your best self.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a huge misconception with regards to what self-compassion is. Kind of coming back, I'll come back to that in a second, but what you were saying earlier about like taking your whole self with you in those journeys, I always use this metaphor of like identity being like a table. And so thinking about like, if a table is kind of what you present to the world, the legs under the table are the things that sustain who you are. And when we place all of our eggs in one basket, it's as if we remove all the other legs under the table and we just keep this one leg under that table. And so when that leg inevitably disappears, you know, say bodybuilding show goes away and you're no longer just this bodybuilder, the table's going to collapse. Hence why it's so important to nurture all the other things that are important to us in our lives. Not forget that leg can be under our table, sustaining it in addition to other things. But it just means that, say, if you've been pursuing just weight loss for your wedding and you've stopped socializing, you've stopped speaking to your friends, you've stopped going out for like, you know, chats and coffees with your work colleagues, all this other stuff has gone away. The minute that you're no longer dieting for your wedding, you literally realize that there's nothing else around you in your life. It's just that one thing. Another table has collapsed, which is why people find it so difficult. Hence why I think, as an exercise psychologist, it's funny because a lot of my clients in therapy sessions will be like, Clara, that's another conversation we've had where we've literally not even spoken about exercise. And I'm like, yeah, I know, because you're going to the gym. I don't care about that. Let's talk about everything else to make sure that you're still cultivating these other parts of your life that are important to you, so that once we get to the goals, once our work is terminated and that leg maybe like is no longer there or it's not as big, you've still got something to hold yourself up on. So that's the identity piece, and exactly kind of what you said. With regards to self-compassion, like I said, there's so many misconceptions about what self-compassion actually is. And if we look at the literature, particularly around like compassion-focused therapy, which is a therapeutic modality that I use a lot in my work, what they kind of define compassion as having sort of two psychologies. The first psychology of compassion is having like a sensitivity to our distress and understanding where that comes from. And the second psychology of compassion, which people always forget about, is the compassionate action of doing something about it. So compassion isn't this softly, oh, it's okay, don't worry about it, yada, yada, yada. It's having an understanding and an empathy for that, but without compassionate action, it means nothing. So compassion isn't letting yourself off the hook. In fact, compassion is fucking difficult. It's so hard because it requires the courage and the vulnerability to put yourself out there and do something that is incredibly scary, such as, you know, allow your body to gain weight. That's terrifying. If you are a woman in our current society, you know, in the way that people just take liberties on commenting on our bodies, for example, gaining weight when you have gone through an extreme, like whether that's an extreme weight loss stage or not, but gaining weight is terrifying. It's really scary. So using compassion to do something about that, to cultivate your own ability to soothe yourself, is really courageous, because that's just not an easy thing to do. And so another way of thinking about compassion is also as this kind of like not quite a binary, but in a sense it's like compassion can be tender, it can be nurturing, it can be caring, it can be that softly, but compassion can also be fierce. That like a bit, I imagine it like a bear having a nap and a bear just screaming like a mama bear defending her baby. That fierce self-compassion, that's the idea of like, shit, I am so unhappy, I need to do something about this. Whether that is, I'm so unhappy in my body right now, my health feels awful, I want to do something about it, and that something about it looks like weight loss. Or holy crap, I feel awful, I'm so hyper focused on food and exercise, it's getting in the way of everything in my life, I need to do something about it. I need to commit to gaining weight, and I need to commit to overcoming that. Self-compassion allows us to kind of do both things and take action, because the reason why we're taking action is not because we hate ourselves. The motive for it, that's the defining factor. The motive is willingness to care for our well-being.
I think something that a lot of people forget in this whole journey is that no phase is permanent. Everything is temporary and transient. And the way that I don't know what it is. Maybe you can put your psychological twist to it, but it's almost like any moment we feel ourselves stuck in, or any moment that we feel challenged in, or if it's like, oh, I'm going through this phase right now, which is a primer phase or a maintenance phase or a growing phase, and because it's so uncomfortable from what you feel like it's forever, which is why people can't commit to the long term. They feel like any suffering is for the long term, and there's no commitment to it because of that initial fear that comes to it, which is what I said at the beginning when it comes to like body image and self-perception and all of that other body stuff. That only grows with your own growth, with your own approach, with your own mindset growth, because you can change the body, but if the mind is still the same, you'll find a way to self-sabotage yourself back to your original roots.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like it's such an underappreciated aspect of it. I think that a lot of people, when they start body transformation, in either direction, I don't think a lot of people appreciate just this, like the size of the change that they're going to experience in their own personal life and in their own personal approach. Like I think a lot of people think about body transformations as being just that, like a body transformation. They don't realize at the beginning of the journey anyway that in order to do that, they like inevitably their mind is going to change when coached appropriately and when done with sufficient support, and that is why and that is so challenging, because think about it this way too, like if for your entire life you have been the fat friend, right? If that's been your identity your entire life, to step away from that means cultivating a new part of yourself, means acknowledging that maybe that part of you wasn't serving you. It means defining yourself as a different individual within your friend group, for example, and that has a cost to it. Like that is not easy or straightforward, and there's a lot of distress that can come up from engaging in change, which is why it is so difficult. Because if your life story has been a certain way all this time, like say for example, if your life story is I'm someone who tries to lose weight and I can't lose weight, right? And you kind of cling on to that. If you do then eventually lose weight, what does that do for all the years that you have spent distressed about your weight? What does that do for, like, it could lead to a sense of grief from like, I can't believe I've spent all my life so upset, so sad, so, unhappy with how I look, and it could have been better. Like, that's really heavy to cope with. And I don't think people appreciate that change can happen. And I unfortunately don't think that a lot of coaches also have that realization or that appreciation of the psychological impact of change, because coaches aren't trained in this. The PTs, unless PTs go out of their way to do their own, CPD, etc., they're not going to have that awareness, and it's not their fault at all. But then it's unsurprising that if you help someone lose a ton of weight, right, and then they suddenly go through like these crazy changes in their life, it's unsurprising that they sometimes might go back to where they were. I don't know if you've ever seen this before, but I've had quite a few clients who have gone through a really big life transformation, and then the next fucking thing they're breaking up and they're separating from partners that they've been with for 10 years because their identity has changed so much in that process that it's just no longer compatible with the types of relationship that they had before. And now that is a huge cost. A lot of people would prefer to maintain their current relationship than to lose the weight and then have to undergo that type of a life change. So, I think it just speaks to how difficult change really, really is, and some of those like unintended consequences of all this change. And I think that, and similar to what you said, nothing is permanent, and yet we live in a society that kind of doesn't promote delayed gratification. I mean, I could order something from Amazon this morning, and get it by tonight. Like, we're just not used to delayed gratification, and we're not very good, even though nothing is permanent. Exactly as it is, not just in our fitness journey, but nothing in life is permanent. That's like the one kind of holy truth, right? Everything is constantly changing. As humans, we don't cope very well with change, and so again, like there's such a big adjustment that is required from somebody when undertaking any type of challenge, that supporting them, I think, like as fitness professionals, as psychologists working in the industry, supporting them with that is almost as important, if not more important, than like explaining the ins and outs of training and, you know, nutrition and all that type of stuff. So I feel like I went off on a bit of a rant there, but I hope it gives a bit of context to kind of where I'm coming from.
The change part is actually something that I spoke about on a prior podcast, which I think you'll like this one too. It's, you know, the little Google Maps and how you can pick up that little yellow figure.
Yeah.
A lot of people treat their journey like they can just pick up that figure and plop them to their destination. But in saying that, it's like they don't realize that how you grow in the process. Absolutely. You don't just end up there. So worrying about how you can stay there, worrying about the what ifs, worrying about the costs of change or the benefits of change, you don't just become that person overnight having to figure your way out in the new world. You've literally done the process steps on the way there, which is why focusing on the end goal never really gets you to the end goal, because you can look at the map all you want, but unless you get your ass into the car and drive your ass to that place, you ain't going anywhere. So it's like you become on the journey, you learn on the journey, you struggle on the journey, and it's those struggles that kind of teach you how to stay there. Because if you don't struggle on the way there, then when you face challenges and struggles closer to the destination, you have a lot more to fall back on, kind of like that ladder, you know, that ladder meme.
Totally.
Yeah, it's almost like you fall this far down instead of actually taking the process steps there. Something you said I wanted to bring up, which is the whole process of change and why things are so hard to change. Like I had a girl not that long ago say, Taekwondo is so easy. My workouts are so easy, but why is nutrition so hard? Like I find tracking so hard. I just keep going back to the way that I was before, and I'm not sticking to things properly. And this is kind of where like habits are hard to change, because every belief, this is something I've started telling myself since listening to you over and over in my head, is every single thing that is stopping you from getting to where you want to be is actually protecting you. It's a positive for some part of you, but you're perceiving it as a negative because it's stopping you. It's not serving you. It's hindering you, but it's there to protect you in some way. It's serving a purpose in some way. Like, for example, something could be stopping someone from getting bored or feeling lonely, and that's an uncomfortable emotion. So then what do? They watch Netflix and distract themselves with food and TV versus doing whatever it is they need to do, or like procrastinating with work. Something that I can admit to with this ADHD I'm still trying to friggin' solve is like when I know a task is really hard to start, the discomfort of sitting through trying to figure something out is more painful, quote unquote, than my alternate actions, which could be procrastinating. It could be, let's just say, could be eating. It could be just list of other activities there. Like I could pick anything else that doesn't serve me, and that if it was eating, that could take me backwards. If I was eating like exurious amounts of food, but that would be more comfortable to my brain than me trying to plow through something that is too intellectually challenging for me.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's that function that it serves, right? Because, for example, in your case, to sit down and to try and tackle a task that is really difficult, that could be overwhelming. Not only because the task itself is really difficult, because maybe then it also brings you face to face with the realities and struggles of living with ADHD and how difficult things are. And that can be really, that could be really depressing to some people. That could provoke a lot of anxiety. It could kind of give rise to other thoughts around like, how am I ever going to do this? I'm not good at anything. Do you know what I mean? Like, it might not be your experience, but it could be that experience for other people. So yeah, like being observing our behaviors as something that's completely functional is such a liberating way to understand where we're coming from and see, that all behavior makes sense in context. And I talk about this all the time. One thing that you said earlier that I just wanted to pick up on, just to extend the analogy of like putting yourself in like the Google Maps and not driving. If all you're focused on, right, if you plan a route on your Google Maps on your phone and you plan on driving there, if all of our focus is on getting there, right, in this predicted particular journey, And yet we start the journey, and for some reason there's like roadworks and we have to take a diversion. If all we're focusing is on the outcome and expect ourselves to get to that destination via this one single route, our perception of taking a B road and going off, you know, on an alternative route, we might experience that as failure, even if it gets us to the same place, or even if just because of those roadworks we go on this journey and we end up visiting something else. Like, I don't know in Australia, but here, for example, like you might have the straightforward like A route to get somewhere, or you have the coastal path, for example. And if all I'm focused on is in getting to the destination in the straight line as quickly as possible, you know, and then I end up having to take the B route, I might get so frustrated, so angry at the fact that it's going to take me longer, that I'm not on this main route, because all I want to do is get to this destination. And you know what might happen? I might go on this B route, and if I'm a bit more flexible with my goals, I might actually find a new little town that I wasn't expecting to discover, and I might just decide to hang out there for a little bit. And that's the beauty of psychological flexibility, is that, you know, you could still get to where you want to be. You could take an alternative route, but also it allows us to be okay with like those changes kind of organically happening.
That just popped another thought in my brain. In stopping at that route, say for example there was like a weather distress or whatever, but you just decided to enjoy yourself at this little town for a couple of nights, and then you actually had the weather clear up and you could go back on your original route, and you're already, just say, 3 weeks closer to whatever road trip you're on than if you kept continuing down the coastal route, because you had the patience to sit steady and it happened that way. And I think this also feeds into what you were talking about before with the whole like self-sabotage and like body image and trying to go into either direction, is that people have the wrong perception of what the journey should look like, because they're trying to rush themselves there. And in trying to rush themselves to this end output, they won't let themselves build, for example, for long enough, because there are so many people that say they want to build muscle and lose fat at the same time, when pretty much most women listening to this will be better served doing one or the other, because life is so busy that consistency is hard in itself. And are you even training hard enough to effectively do both at the same time? But it's like you pick one just so you can tangibly see the results more. Like if you have fat to lose first, lose that so then you can physically see the results of growing and allow yourself to comfortably grow. But I think it's just like people aren't patient. That was really fast. People aren't patient enough to allow themselves to trust themselves to go through the journey, because they feel like they're wasting resources.
Yeah, and it's really challenging. It's that kind of like, I want it, you know, and the best time to start was yesterday, but I'm starting now, and so I'm just like desperately trying to get there and trying to grab at something. I think it also speaks to the difficulty that we do have in kind of like staying focused on a task. And I think especially when it comes to changing our bodies, seeing those tangible results like does take time, it does take consistency, and so that can often be distracting, or kind of like people might not be willing to spend sufficient time there. But again, it's not, I don't think it's any fault of their own, because then if you jump on Instagram and you see some people's 12-week transformations, you might be gobsmacked, and yet unless you're in the industry, you don't maybe know or appreciate that most coaches, you know, will lie about how long it took a client to get there. They might use pictures that don't reflect the actual, you know, transformation period. They might say this person dieted for 12 weeks, and yet they've been working with the client for a year and a half, and they'll be using the pictures from when they first started with them, not the pictures from like the 12-week change. Equally, like people maybe don't appreciate is that most people are taking some sort of performance enhancing drug, whether we like to admit it or not. It is fucking rife, and so you cannot compare the progress that you're making as someone who, you know, is going at this naturally, training 3 days a week, versus someone who's taking rakes of clenbuterol and anavar and is training 5 times a week following an incredibly restrictive diet and is really unhappy. And I think that makes people, you know, want to be able to do it all, because they see other people doing it and yet don't have, unfortunately, the appreciation that it's not. I mean, Instagram is just a smokescreen, and yet it looks so real. It looks so real. I've done it. I look at people's transformations and I go, how the heck did that person build those shoulders in that time frame? Like, we've been training for the same length of time, and then I go, funny that. Okay, I know why. They've maybe been taking some spicy sauce alongside their breakfast, right? And so, but unless you're in it, I mean, I was so naive to this type, and I still am so naive to this type of stuff now. So you can imagine how for someone who's kind of just observing and like floating on the internet, seeing these before and after transformations, how they could just be like, well, this person did that in 12 weeks. Like, why can't I do that? And you go, well, it's a bit more complicated than that, right?
I'm so glad you brought this up, because this is probably one of the things that I rant on about more than anything, at least twice a week on Facebook, because in Facebook groups, it's funny. The posts with the most likes, with the most comments, with the most what's your meal plan like, what's your diet like, are the ones with these before and afters of these crazy transformations, or someone looking so insanely lean and shredded, or someone that's competing, someone that's striated who can even look unhealthily skinny. Like, people comment on that stuff more than they comment on a normal, natural, average body or someone trying to build. Like, it's those things that get the attention. And I actually did a reel on this the other day, but as soon as I get it onto Instagram, I'm tagging you, because it was on that very thing. Because there is a person that posts 6 week, not 12, 6 week transformations that are more like 6 months. They look like 6 months. And then you have people commenting saying, I must be doing something wrong. What am I doing wrong? And
I know, it's funny. I've seen that too, like done by people that I know, like coaches that I know of that have maybe been working with a client for 2 years. And then they post a story, like they post on their Instagram being like, oh yeah, like, this person came on board and in 3 months they achieved this. And I'm like, that is bullshit. Like, that is such fucking bullshit. Like, excuse my French, but holy, what the fuck, right? Like, even for that client, like, I think if I was that client, I don't know if I don't know what it must feel like for that client to consent to that information being put forward, if they've even been asked for consent in posting that type of a post, because the client will read that and be like, well, that's not true. Like, that took me a lot longer to achieve that transformation. So why are you lying about it? Why are you lying about how long it took me? Should it have taken me less time? Does this basically mean that I didn't do a good enough job? Do you see what, like, it's really messed up when you think about it. And I don't know, it's annoying, because I think that a lot of it stems from the fact that, yeah, these shocking transformations grab so much more attention. And so ultimately then a lot of fitness professionals are maybe just like slaving away to the algorithm, trying to wow people and trying to sell something that you just can't buy. It's something that doesn't exist. But I mean, we've seen this in the fitness industry for so long, and it's such a big gripe of mine too. And I think it became more of a gripe of mine when I realized that all these people are taking performance enhancing drugs. Like, I think I was just so naive to it. I just didn't realize that someone might be willing to take illegal fat burners to go on holiday, to get lean for holiday. Like, that just seems outrageous to me, to my like narrow experience. And yet to find out, I was like, no wonder I've been struggling all this time. Like, we're not on the level, like, same playing field at all. Like, what the hell? But it's such a shame that is just the way that like our society works. And then, like, if you're a coach trying to make a business, like, you need people to be seeing your stuff. And if the way that people see your stuff is by posting ridiculous transformations that are implausible for anyone who knows how long a transformation takes. But yes, if you don't, then how can you know better?
And there was, I warned her in the group. There was this girl who wanted, like, she was struggling to stay consistent, full stop. And then she's like, you know what, I'm going to do this photo shoot, blah, blah, blah. She does this photo shoot, and I think it was like a 12-week thing that she decided to do with her fitness coach. And then all of a sudden, like, I warned her. I even sent her a private DM because I was so concerned. I don't know why I bothered, but anyway, I sent her a concerned DM. And then she's like, yeah, well, my coach this, coach that, I'm this, I'm that. Like, she kept reassuring herself that she was fine. But then I saw about 2 months later, she posted in the same group saying, I don't know what to do about my emotional eating. I can't stop eating at night. I can't stop this. And then I saw her comment on someone else's post just the other week, which is now, let's say, about 4 months. No, it's about 6 months on. She's still struggling with the same emotional eating, and she's probably much heavier than she was before as well, because all her posts are completely gone. Before, she was posting consistently, not a single post anymore, just complaining on the same post, trying to resonate with the same people that are all emotionally eating. And it's like people don't see the other side of all of that.
No,
And
it's such a shame. It's such a shame. Sorry, I totally interrupted you there, but I got a few messages from clients that I've worked with in the past who have kind of worked on that disordered eating disorder relationship with exercise and stuff. And I remember one particular client messaged me once, just really worried. She was like, honestly, Clara, I'm so distressed, I'm so angry because I see all these coaches in my local town who are helping these females like get super lean for photo shoots, and now I'm seeing them post photo shoot. I see them every day at the gym doing hours of cardio. I can see that they're not gaining the weight. I can see that they're struggling, and these coaches are doing nothing about it. And she was like, I feel so upset and so distressed by it. And I was like, I know, like it is so hard to see, and it's completely fucking heartbreaking, because the other side of it is that you can't force someone to change, and you can't, like what you were saying earlier, right, about like these behaviors being completely functional, it making sense in context, even though it's not serving that person towards health recovery and like joy probably in life. The behaviors, like the constantly doing cardio or like the jumping on the next photo shoot program or whatever, that's serving a purpose of protecting them against like the potential distress from, from the fears becoming real. So it's a whole malarkey, like it's messed up.
Also, coming back to, because this was me, so I can relate with this one. Jumping to the next one, because it was, now I have something to keep me motivated. I can't flake on my word now. I just committed, because my fear, my thing was, I always quit on things. Little did I know that it's actually a trait of ADHD. You start something and then you quit something because then you get bored with it. But that was my thing. And I remember my parents always saying, why put you in this? You always quit everything you start. So that was the narrative I told myself. So I never thought I could continue doing things. So then I kept putting myself into things that weren't serving me, knowing that, hey, this is actually going to lock me in. I can't quit now. But
yeah,
but this then stems into what I wanted to, the next topic of it all was, it's easy to start blaming yourself for behaving in ways that you don't serve you, which is what leads to more of the self-sabotage, the overeating, the undereating, the like fucking it up, buying or ordering food or drinks that aren't aligned with your values. But it's because you blame yourself for not being good enough, for not being disciplined enough, for not being restrictive enough, not hard enough, not motivated enough. What exactly is behind all of that? And where does motivation come in here? Where does discipline come in here? Where does the self-sabotage kind of filter into that?
Whew, big question. Okay, so the whole not being good enough narrative, I think exactly as you described, kind of that often that comes, it's a learned thing. Like no one is born kind of feeling like they're not good enough. We're all kind of born inherently feeling worthy. And so not the whole idea of not being good enough is something that we learn throughout our life. We often learn that through experiences that make us feel ashamed about ourselves, experiences that make us feel worse about being ourselves, and experiences that teach us that maybe other people aren't safe to trust and that we are not trustworthy. So other people maybe view us as not being good enough, and we also view ourselves as not being good enough. Those learned experiences or those lived experiences of shame give rise to these key fears of not being good enough. So you have a lived experience of being made to feel like you're not good enough, and therefore you develop a fear of that belief or that story being confirmed, right? And so in having that fear of what if I am not good enough, we then start to engage in all these behaviors that protect us from perhaps realizing confirming or disconfirming that particular belief, right? So let's just take someone who has always been made to feel like they're not good enough because they are overweight, right? And so this person's particular fear is, to have, to realize that, that they are overweight, they don't want to be overweight, they're really scared of other people judging them, constantly, blah, blah, blah. But they're so scared of people judging them for their weight, and they're so scared of people judging them for them not being good enough, that it gets in the way of them even engaging or attempting to engage in weight loss practices. Because if they fail, it confirms the belief that they are in fact a failure, that they are in fact not good enough, that they are in fact never going to be able to lose the weight and maintain that weight loss. Whereas if they don't even try, or if every time that they try, they come up with a way of self-sabotaging, then obviously it's not like a conscious process per se, where they don't go, you know what, today I'm going to go and self-sabotage myself. It doesn't work like that. But our brain's way of keeping us protected from realizing that that is in fact true. I'll give you an example. It's an example of like 3 different clients kind of morphed into one, but you kind of get the picture. So take a client who is presenting with binge eating like behaviors, right? They're overeating and they can't really understand why, because they were so on point up until this point, but they have decided that they want to take their physique goals further. And suddenly after making that decision, they find themselves overeating, right? And so in unpacking it, we start to see that, okay, the self-sabotage, if we understand that behavior as like a defense mechanism, it bears the question of, well, what are you defending yourself from? What is the self-sabotage trying to protect you from in this particular moment? And when we then look back at their life history, what we might see is that, for example, they've maybe had various experiences in their life of being really good at something, and then having something happen where the rug is pulled from under their feet and they realize that they're not as good as they thought that they were, right? So this person then learns, or has had the awful shame experience of thinking that they're really good, and then that sinking feeling in their stomach of like, actually, I'm not good at all, right? Just by things that have happened to them in their life. So because they've had that experience, and that experience feels so horrific, kind of all over, it's just visceral, it feels awful, they've then learned that if they try to pursue greatness, it is very likely that they will encounter rise and fall. And the pain of the fall from previous learned experiences is simply not worth the potential joy from the gain. Do you see where I'm going? So for someone, it is better, it is safer, psychologically safer to self-sabotage any kind of extreme physique pursuits by overeating, because the prospect of trying, getting there, and then, gaining weight again, or failing potentially, or being beat in a physique competition, for example, that feels worse than self-sabotage. Do you see where I'm going with that?
Yeah, and I think this is also why it is so important to think of that Google Maps guy.
Yeah.
Because you're not just plopping yourself there. If you do it the right way, you're going to actually stay there, maybe in the past before, because we know that memories aren't real and they're not reliable. So our recount of whatever happened before is probably not even accurate. We just remember the fall because of the emotions that were so tied and attached to that, but not realizing that, hey, the approach you took that led to that was not the right one for you to start with. Whereas now, if you actually take the right approach, you'll grow into that person and you'll be able to stay there and use it as a platform to become better, which is exactly why doing it the right way matters.
Yeah, it's super important. And I think, like, exactly what you said, it's that whole, we can't take away people's learned experience, and we can't take away the fact that people are going to have, that embodied memory of the shame that they experience. And hence why having compassion and doing these changes compassionately is so important, because when we can show someone and when we can help somebody develop the self-reassuring tools, it gives them the courage to revisit something that previously didn't work out, revisit it with kindness and with compassion, and actually gives them the courage to be in that space again and realize that A, the first time the reason it failed wasn't their fault, and B, that it doesn't have to be that way, right? So if someone has experienced weight loss before and has regained the weight and that's been really traumatic for them, they might be really scared of losing weight, understandably. And so for them to pursue weight loss again will take a lot of courage and vulnerability. It will take a lot of self-compassion, because it might be the kind thing to do in that particular case. It might be really helpful for them to lose weight again, let's just imagine. And so helping them develop kindness towards themselves in the pathway, while acknowledging that, like, their visceral experience is very real, and that, like, it's normal and it makes complete sense that they're so scared, and that it makes complete sense that they're so tempted to self-sabotage that weight loss pursuit, because the last time that they got there, it was so horrific. If we can do that compassionately, and if we can do that by understanding, by empathizing, by, showing people that it's not, that their distress is not their fault. It's not chosen. No one chooses to feel like crap. No one chooses to, quite directly sabotage their results. Like, no one willingly, not maybe no one, but like most people don't want to feel like crap. Most people want to feel good. And so when people do things that make them feel like crap, it's not quite as straightforward as doing it by so that's going to have an impact, and that's going to have an effect. And I think it's being able to understand that and being able to help people understand that too, that can then help them, overcome some of those self-sabotage behaviors when they realize that it makes sense. Like when someone goes, oh my God, I can totally see why I'm doing this. Like it allows them to have compassion and empathy for that part of them that's trying to protect them from distress. So, it kind of all links up in that same way, I think.
Yeah, and on the note with it's almost like you already feel bad where you are right now because it's not where you want to be, but it's known, it gives you a sense of control, it's predictable, and that's what the brain likes.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And I think, like I said, people don't like change. Change is really scary. And despite nothing being permanent, we will do whatever it takes to cling on to permanence. Like we will do whatever we can to maintain our environment is stable, to kind of do whatever we can to kind of maintain that status quo, because change is so difficult. Change requires so much adaptation. Change in and of itself, even if it's positive change, still has a negative impact on, it's still going to affect our stress, and our stress is still going to impact on our health, for example. So change is not easy, and it's not straightforward, and therefore, self-sabotage, because self-sabotage gives us a prediction of what's going to happen in the future. That is a lot more comfortable, even if it brings with it a lot of distress. That is often more psychologically comfortable than engaging in the change itself. Hence why, if we can help, rather than helping someone, they don't need a better nutrition plan or a better training plan, that person needs compassion, that person needs understanding, empathy, to navigate the fear that is inevitably going to arise when they engage in those big life changes. And we're focusing on that, that's how we get people to actually commit to these changes and to maintain those changes, because it's in developing that courage and the bandwidth of distress tolerance that we can support that person to move forward, I think.
And this is why it's really important to get a coach or a therapist or both, because you need to learn to be patient with yourself. And I find that to be the biggest barrier to anyone permanently getting results, is that they're not patient with their own progress. Because like you said, those 12-week transformations, seeing things online, comparing to other things, not delaying gratification. But the only way to really get to the end goal and to break through these sabotaging habits or whatever it is that keeps you stuck is just a lot of freaking patience to work through it. And there's one more thing I want to bring up after this, but with one of my girls, for example, she is also severe ADHD, and because of that, I understand the way her brain works, so I'm trying to work with her. But with that, it's like no matter how much I try to simplify things, she's always trying to add more, do more. I should try tracking things. With her, I'm not using a tracking approach, but it's like she's trying to think of more and more things to add to get her to the place faster, or just looking for other things. This is what a lot of people do, though. They look for more and more things to add when they yet to master just the basic things to get the ball rolling and to build confidence.
Yeah. It makes people feel like they're being more effective because they're doing more, but more isn't always better, and we know that. But it's not until often we experience that we go, oh, all right, I see what you mean. I always say, there's only so many times you can bang your head against the wall before you start to wonder why you have a headache. And it's almost like sometimes we just have to get there and be like, fuck, right, this isn't working for me.
I like that analogy. And the last thing I wanted to bring up is, when there's chaos in someone's life, or when there's a lot going on, whether it's relationships, etc.,
mm-hmm.
It can be very easy to become critical on your body, more critical on your body in those periods of time, and try to grab more control on your food, more probably binge eating tendencies, overeating tendencies. Even without that, you just become a lot more critical of your body. Maybe you can explain the psychological reasons behind that and how you would navigate that.
I mean, it's complicated and it's person dependent, but often what we observe is that when life feels really chaotic, we try to grab onto whatever we feel like is stable, and our sense of self is relatively stable, in the sense that you live with yourself and you're always going to live with yourself, right? So often it can be controlling ourselves or directing some of that criticism towards ourselves is a lot more functional than directing that criticism towards the people that maybe deserve it. Like, because we can't always criticize or get angry or express our emotions towards the things or the people that deserve it. And in those cases, it is, you know, that emotion has to go somewhere. So it's actually a lot more functional to direct it towards ourselves. I'll give you an example that isn't really fitness related, but kind of thinking about this from a psychological perspective. Not that I work in this capacity at all, but let's just take the image of a woman who's maybe in a heterosexual relationship that is psychologically or physically abusive, right? Their threat system, like, they can't fight back. They might not even be able to get away from that relationship because they might not be financially independent. Sorry, they might be fully financially dependent on this person. They've, you know, had all their relationships cut off, etc., off the back of this relationship, and so the most functional response for that person isn't to fight back, because they could die, but they could get killed quite plausibly, and they maybe can't run away either. So fighting or flighting isn't going to work. So the most functional thing to do in that moment is to become really submissive and to become really self-critical, because then at least that's going somewhere, but it's kind of like it's being internalized towards a self. So they also kind of like assume that if things are going so terribly, it's easier to assume that it's our fault than that it's someone else's fault, because we might not actually be able to blame somebody else. We might not be able to actually do something about placing that blame on someone else. And so if someone, coming back to the idea here, like if someone's life is completely up in arms, if things are really chaotic, there's a lot going on, directing a lot of that chaos inwards provides a sense of control. But it doesn't always have to be as sinister as that. Often it might just be that, let's just say you've gone through a breakup, right? And you're super distressed. You're like literally going through hell. You're having to move homes. You're having to like move to a different city. Like you're having to change jobs. There's all this shit going on, right? And you go, okay, well, all this chaos is happening. I've just broken up. I'm into my like fitness girly era. I'm going to start going to the gym and I'm going to start taking care of myself. I'm going to fucking, you know, show him, assuming it's a heterosexual relationship. And then something that starts as I'm going to start taking care of myself, as I said earlier, the more we emphasize or place focus on our food and on our exercise, the more detrimental it can become and the more rigid we can become. Something that started that way might then turn into that person really relying on those behaviors to cope with stress. And then they might start to place more attention on how they look. And maybe that brings up thoughts of like, did he not like me because of how I looked? And, you know, do I need to hate myself into looking differently? And do I need to then start controlling these things even more? And like it can spiral so quickly. So often like that's where these things come from. It's not, again, by choice. It's simply either super functional, that we start blaming ourselves because we can't express that emotion outward, and so interpreting the situation, or even in situations that don't make sense, if the only way, like again, if a child is being abused, right, that child can't make sense of that experience because it doesn't make sense. So the way in which their brains make sense of the experience is by teaching that child that it must be you must be the problem. And so the only way that that child can make sense of the experience is that it must be their fault, right? And that's completely functional, because if a child was to think that their primary caregivers don't give a fuck about them, that could break your world. So then therefore you must, like, blaming yourself is more functional than doing that. So coming back to the example here of fitness, if life is all up in arms, if self-criticism starts to, you know, amount more and more and more and more, it probably is really functional. It probably makes complete sense in that person's context that they are directing that blame and that chaos inward rather than outward, because it's easier to blame ourselves than it might be to make sense of, like, you know, a whole cascade of different experiences. Or equally, it might be that when life is out, like, not in control, we take control of the things that we can control, which is our body and what we put into our body. And it might come initially from, like, a good place. Someone might start exercising to cope with grief. And then the next thing you know, they are completely reliant on exercise to tolerate the distress from grief. And they can't live without exercise. And the more they exercise, the more at risk they are of developing, you know, thinking patterns that pertain to, say, like an anorexia diagnosis, for example. So it can happen in sneaky ways, never by fault of the individual, but that often is kind of what explains how these things come to be, which is really, really painful to see and to realize, I think.
I think the whole bow to all of this that you can tie at the top is self-awareness is really critical in making the first step. And once you become aware, you need to have that self-compassion there. You need to not judge yourself. You need to not be critical of yourself, because that would just lead to the same spiral, probably even worse, because like you mentioned, it's just a downward spiral from there once you start to judge yourself. So with that, this is part 1 of part 2. Part 2 is going to be more related to motivation in exercise and improving your exercise performance with sports psychology, more of Clara's little specialty. So I'm so excited for that. Really excited for that, actually, because pretty much with all of this as well, like, you need to first have self-belief that you can. And once you have that self-belief, you start to act in concordance with the belief that you hold. So with that, is there anything else that you want to tie this up with? Where can people find you, and any other fancy shiz biz?
Yeah, no, nothing else. I think you summarized it really well. Like, it all starts with awareness, and awareness accompanied with self-compassion can facilitate change, whatever that looks like for you. If anyone else wants to find me, my handle on Instagram is Clara_the Exerpsych, which is a play on words of exercise and psychologist. And my website is theexerpsych.com. So if anyone wants to reach out, ask me questions, inquire about working with me in whatever capacity as a coach or as applied psychologist, then you can find me there. And if anyone's got any thoughts or questions about the podcast, then I'd love to hear them. So yeah, no, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to the second part too. I think that's going to be a good addition to this. This is more like an intro, compassion, etc. The next step is like, okay, well, what do we actually do with this? So yeah.
So we provided you with the gun. Next session, we're loading it and we're shooting some bazookas out of foam rollers. If you saw my last reel with the foam roller bazooka, we're shooting it at you. So yeah, go find her on Instagram and go check out her posts, because she posts some amazing stuff on. There's one recently that she put up on feeling fat as well, which kind of bounces off what I said too, but she goes into a lot more detail into the, I guess, ways that we can view things in different spectrums, so that we can remove our own, I guess, self-perceived notion, so that we come to a lot more objectively, not subjectively, objectively. So yeah, with that, go find Clara, let us know, go message her if this helps you, and let me know as well. And don't forget to give my show a 5-star rating, and you will hear me on the other one, and you will hear her on her other one. So thanks for listening, guys. Bye.